Like every Irish family gave at least one of their children to the priesthood. Every Muslim family wanted, or to the nunnery. Every Muslim family wanted at least one of their children to be a scholar. This was so deeply rooted in the Islamic ethos. So it really saw the pursuit and love of knowledge as at the root of the human condition. Now, having said that, some of the most beautiful human beings that I have ever met, and this is a true story. I was in West Africa, and it was a very dark night. Our car got stuck in mud in the middle of the Sahara, literally. And we walked a ways because somebody had told us that there's an encampment in this certain area. We found a Bedouin who was a sheep herder, illiterate. He was so happy. And he was the only person out there with his goats and sheep. He was so happy to see us. He went, he slaughtered a goat, he fed us. It was an extremely windy night with a lot of rain. When we woke up, he had stayed the whole night holding the centerpiece of the tent to make sure that it didn't collapse on us. That was his hospitality, because we were his guests. And the Prophet said, whoever believes in God in the last day, let him honor the guest. And that was, somebody who was with me from England could not believe it. This man had actually deprived himself of sleep in order to ensure that we slept. Some of the best people that I have met in this world have been illiterate, simple believers. And that's the truth. And I have absolutely no contempt for those people at all. What I see is that some people are facilitated to learn. The circumstances are ripe for them to learn, and other people are deprived of that. The people that do have the gift of learning should actively be engaged in trying to spread that gift to other people, because learning in the true sense of the word, not learning for a degree, not learning to become somebody of stature or somebody of wealth, but learning really for the sake of God in our tradition. And the Prophet Muhammad said one of the signs of the latter days is that people will learn for other than the sake of God. So at the root for me, and I can only speak for myself, I'm technically speaking on behalf of a tradition, but that is far too weighty as far as I'm concerned. And I think it's an example of the impoverished state of our community that people like me actually represent the tradition. And I don't say that humbly, I say that knowing what the tradition is, spending a good part of my life in it, and reading. When I hear people call ISIS medieval, it really upsets me, because I spent a lot of time with medieval scholars, and I know for a fact that they would have nothing to do with these people. And in fact, if those people would actually read these people, they certainly would not be doing what they are doing. And I think, unfortunately, the medieval period gets a bad rap. I think people would really be stunned at what they find. And just to give you one example, I'm going to read from one of the greatest representatives of our tradition. And this is Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, who writes about why people disbelieve. And he says, and he died in 1111, so this is 1,000 years ago. Firstly, there are some who, failing to find God by observation, conclude that there is no God, and that this world of wonders made itself, or existed from everlasting. They are like a man who, seeing a beautifully written letter, should suppose that it had written itself without a writer, or had always existed. People in this state of mind are so far gone in error that it is of little use to argue with them. Such are found amongst the physicists and astronomers in particular. Right? So 1,000 years ago, you had the same debates and arguments. These are not new debates. In fact, people forget that Karl Marx did his dissertation on Greek materialists, the people that Socrates was going around destroying their arguments. So it's not like they haven't always been here. They've always been here, and they will always be here. And they're part of, from our perspective, as a believer, they're part of God's creation. And one of the wonderful things that Hafiz, the great Persian poet, said, if you saw that the world were all guests of God, and you understood that this was a banquet that He invited them to, how would you treat those guests, even the rude ones? Ghazali says that the world is like a banquet, and God has put out these silver and gold plates and perfume, but it's a banquet where you come and then you have to leave and another group comes and then they leave and another group comes. He said what you should do is go in, eat the meal, smell the perfume, and be deeply grateful for the banquet and show that gratitude. And then he said, and then leave. He said what some people do is they start taking the silver and gold plates and tucking them away for themselves. And so I think that it's very difficult in these days to represent traditions. There are a lot of things in traditions that people see as odious. They see them as hateful, or they see them as discriminatory. And I think a lot of tradition is problematic. One of the things that we teach our students at Zaytuna is that tradition is inheriting a lawsuit. And you have to recognize that there are ongoing debates, and these debates have to be brought out again. There's no double jeopardy in tradition, right? So we have to debate these things, and trying to understand our traditions in the light of the world we're living in is very difficult, because it is a confusing world. Particularly, we've lost a lot of the things that have enabled us in the past to be much more human. One of the things in these verses that I read out, one of the things that I think they indicate is that adversity is part of life. And this is certainly in the Quranic narrative. And there's a reason for adversity. We learn through adversity. We learn often compassion from our own suffering. We learn to be compassionate with others. Empathy is one of the most important qualities in all of our religious traditions. And to be empathic to be an empath is actually quite difficult in this world. There are people that suffer greatly because they so much feel the pain of other people and have very difficult times. And then we also have sociopaths, and they're very real. And these people, it's estimated, I read one book, The Sociopath Next Door, that estimated that about 1 out of 20 people in the United States is sociopathic. That's quite a large number. That means there are probably a few in the audience tonight, you know. And some of them function quite well and learn to at least pretend to be empathic because they know that it's decorum, but then others simply don't care. They can eliminate large numbers of people like Stalin or Bashar Assad, or literally eliminate large numbers of people without, I mean, they say Hitler used valerian to sleep at night, but it's amazing because I've tried valerian and it doesn't work that well. I mean, so I would think he would have needed propofol like what Michael Jackson was using. But if you're sociopathic, you're not losing sleep over killing large numbers of people, it would appear. And so this is our challenge. For me, living a good life is trying to learn this knowledge of my tradition, which says that the real purpose of our existence here is to come to know God. Not in the way that angels know God, which is immediate knowledge, but to know God through difficulty, through hardship, through suffering. And in coming to know God, the soul is expanded. One of my favorite metaphors from the pre-modern world that was used in the Christian tradition, and I actually found it in a verse in the Quran in Surah Yunus, is the Wheel of Fortune. One of the most important works of the medievals was the Boethius book, The Consolation of Philosophy. And in the second chapter, he uses this metaphor of the Wheel of Fortune, fortuna, fate, that says in the tradition, you can't worship me. In other words, you cannot placate me. I do what I will. But in the Wheel of Fortune, and this is in the chapter of Yunus, where it says that we cause you to, nusayyirukum, like yusayyirukum means to cause you to go around, right? In the land and in the sea. And when you're in a ship and a good wind comes, everybody rejoices and is happy. But then they see a storm off in the distance, and then they begin to feel something. And then the waves begin to pile up, and until they think that they're going to be destroyed. And they call on God in absolute sincerity, oh, just save us from this and we will be grateful. Right? This is the bargain with God when troubles happen. A lot of people do this, by the way. It's a very common event. But in the Wheel of Fortune, you had regno, which was I rule. And joy was the emotion associated with that. So farihu biha, it says in the Quran, they rejoiced in this. And then you have regnave at 3 o'clock, which is I used to rule. Right? So they're on their way down. And the appropriate response for that is fear. And then you have the 6 o'clock, which is I used to rule. Right? And then you have the 9 o'clock, which is regnabo, I shall rule. So it's this hope. Part of the purpose of these medieval people, and they understood this, was to get into the hub so that the wheel no longer affected you, to enter into the hub, the eye of the hurricane, so that the world and all of its vicissitudes and calamities and all of these hardships that happen in the world, that you're in this center of stillness. And that stillness, according to our tradition, can only come from the remembrance of God. And this is why if there is a fundamental sin in Islam, they debated on whether it was pride, which is the sin of the devil. But Imam al-Junayd said the fundamental sin of the human being is acedia. It's his distractibility and boredom. Kierkegaard says once God is removed, people are left with boredom. And so they will pursue all these pursuits, what they called the early Christian desert fathers called the noonday devil. And when you read the descriptions of how the noonday devil afflicts them, you see that they're distracted and looking at the window. And see, like now, people looking on their cell phones. I was on the airplane 2 days ago, and I was sitting next to a man that was furious that the internet wasn't working, and said, how dare they advertise? I can't be off this thing for more than 15 minutes. And the whole flight, he was so agitated, like just moving. And this is what they call acedia, sloth, spiritual. It's a spiritual sickness, and it has afflicted our civilization to the utmost degree. We are afflicted with profound boredom, and we're constantly attempting to distract ourselves with drugs, with sex, with money, with pursuit of fame, pursuit of power, of all these things that the Prophet Muhammad said the truest thing that the poet ever spoke was that, "Ala kullu shay'in ma khala Allah batilu." Everything other than Allah is vanity.